I haven't understood one thing. We always tend to blame others than blaming ourselves. I don't know why it works like that.
I think the human person likes the easier route.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like water. You know, water will take the easiest route.
Yeah, the same way that you said, luck, between luck and work.
Yeah.
Mostly we love luck.
We love, if you get the option of luck, then
we don't like working.
You choose that one very fast. That is the essence of life.
But I think even without getting that option, we believe that luck will fall on us at some point.
And you know, you talked about blame. That's a very good thing. Yes. You know, this blame, as much as you put it into two, blaming of others and blaming of ourselves, you also should consider the nature of blame.
Yes.
Because when you blame yourself, then the blame on yourself, if it is pegged on a factor that you can change, then that is better. But when it is pegged on a factor that you cannot change, then you've buried yourself.
You're finished. Now moving on to the application in the education system.
Yeah.
Now maybe you can talk about how we apply because we are educational beings, and so we can we can't finish really without talking about its application in the education system.
That's very true.
Yeah, and maybe so you can talk a little bit about how we apply the attribution theory in education.
So thank you for that. Now, there's one thing about education is that life is education.
Yes.
And whether you like it or not, anything we do must at one time or the other be aligned to education, because education, I think, is the probably form of learning. When you're being educated, you're learning something. And that's why we talk about formal and informal education.
Yes.
So when we talk about education, maybe in this forum, we don't just look at it from the school perspective, but also from the home perspective, where people are learning. Now, maybe I can now change to say that what are some of the influences of attribution in learning? And number one is what we call motivation. Motivation, achievement. And you've said something, I think when you were talking, I asked you a question and you answered a very nice one, where you said that when you want to perform an activity and you are not able to perform that activity, probably you have a second chance of trying again. The second chance in performing this activity sometimes is determined by how you took the first failure, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so if you took the first failure, the way you took it probably determines whether you're going to repeat or try again. And by this I mean, if you take a person who was learning and they failed in the first probably experience, where they're going to try again this task is determined by how they took the first failure. And the motivation or the energy or the drive to try an activity again, a part of it is brought up by what we call the attribution. How did you attribute your first failure?
Yes.
Now, if your first failure was attributed to intelligence or to an internal factor which was stable and cannot be changed, then that has affected your experience or your second trial. Because you see, if I have already branded myself as a person who is not intelligent, I have come up with stable terms that I'm not good in this particular aspect, then basically that says that I'm not really liable to try again.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so we're saying that attribution application in education probably can be used to inform educators and also students on how to motivate themselves and also how to come up with a specific aspect in terms of their motivation and stuff like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think you can talk about, you've talked a lot about motivation.
Yeah.
And maybe considering the student-teacher relationship, maybe you can talk about feedback and assessment. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it seems like you've been in this field, because when you see somebody who knows about feedback and assessment, that means they remember their days in school.
Yes.
Now, assessment is the core of teaching, because at the end of the day, you're assessing students, and you know, assessment is probably, it occurs throughout, because examinations are part of assessment. And unless you assess a student, then you don't prove that they have learned. And also, unless you assess students, which is probably, you have formative and the summative, then you don't get to know how to guide them as they are studying, isn't it? So assessment occurs in two ways. Assessment can be done either during the teaching process and also at the end, which is now what we call the summative assessment. So how can we use the attribution knowledge when you're talking about assessment? Because I think when you talk about feedback, you're also talking about part of it is assessment. We see when you assess, you're gathering data. And then this data is what you give us feedback. I hope that's what you mean.
Yes.
So, while providing this feedback, teachers can actually consider what we call the students' attributes and how they are going to attribute this feedback. And I can imagine, I think you can remember maybe when you were young, and this normally happens at the early stages of education, where a teacher gives you an exam, and when he gives you your result, they tell you that based on these results, you guys are useless. It seems like you cannot do anything. And I think it's good you note that even in the social media, we have had a lot of people trying to refer to their success to their mathematics teacher who said they could not do it. Now, what we are saying is that we should have a change on this. A paradigm shift should be seen here, where as the teacher is giving back their feedback, they should point to specific area. Because in this case, the student will find that they can now probably talk of these things as unstable. You see, the attribution will now be unstable, because you see, they say, okay, you didn't fail in mathematics, but you failed in fraction. You did not fail in fraction, but you failed in division, because when you are taking maybe 5 over 20, you should have divided here, but because you did not divide 5 over 20 in the right way, you did not simplify, then that meant that your answer was also wrong. So you can see they have removed the idea of looking at the problem globally or wholly to a more specific. And that means that the student will now have a point to start working from. So I think in assessment, the way the teacher relays back the feedback is very important. They can either decide to have the student developing a negative attribute or an external, or what we call probably an attribute. They can attribute mathematics in such a way that they feel they cannot manage in future, or they can attribute the learning to a way that they feel is just a small issue which they can sort and probably proceed.
And I think from what you've said, Daktari, what I gather is that from feedback, there is a way that as a teacher you can cultivate resilience in a student. And maybe you can talk about cultivating resilience in students.
Thank you for that. I think without resilience, then you don't get education. Because education is a lifelong activity. And you need to have resilience, the perseverance. The perseverance. You need to have the energy to motivate yourself. And it's good you thought about resilience. Now, effort is normally encouraged when you see hope. You see? If I tell you that you are an intelligent person, then even if you fail, then you know that you are intelligent, and this failure is just temporary. But you see, if I tell you you are useless, even if you succeed, you attribute this to luck. I don't know if you see that.
Yes, that's true.
It's true, If I tell you you're intelligent, no matter what happens, you know that I'm intelligent. My failure is just a step along the way. It's just an obstacle, something I can control. But tell these students that they cannot make it, then you break their resilience. You break their persistence. They lose the motivational aspect, which is very important. So what we're saying is that as a teacher, you should make sure that the way you are relaying information to students, more so what is coming back from the assessment, what is coming back from teaching, because even as you are teaching, you get to talk a lot with the student. Even when you meet on the streets, generally, you should show them that they are people who can progress. And by that, they learn to attribute any failure in class to being something temporary and not stable. It will be just an unstable occurrence that has come up probably in a short period of time.
And from that also, you know, we've talked about the teacher encouraging the student, but we haven't talked about maybe promoting yourself, talking, speaking to yourself, self-efficacy.
Thank you for that. You know, self-efficacy, basically, as you said, is believing in yourself. Kujiamini, sindio? And you've talked about that's a very important and wide area, because when you talk about self-efficacy, we are saying that self-efficacy is transferable. What I mean is this: when a teacher does not believe in themselves, then transferring the belief to the student becomes
very easy.
In fact, most of us, they say that we are a product of probably what you call it, a murdered self-efficacy. Because if it was murdered somewhere and you manage to survive, then you don't have the capacity to birth it in somebody else.
That's true.
So what you said is good, because the teacher must first of all develop self-efficacy. And they say that you cannot give what you don't have. So if the teacher has self-efficacy, then that has built the capacity of the teacher to transfer this self-efficacy to the student. And by self-efficacy, what we're saying is that you are trying to bring this notion to the student that they can manage. You see, it is the self. They are self-efficient. So the external should not necessarily influence their ability. So I think, as I've said, that is very much transferable, more so as a teacher.
And maybe talk about the attribution of diverse learning style in a very short while before we move to the next.
So what we're saying is that students have diverse ways of learning, as you've talked about it. And I think one aspect in classroom that we cannot ignore is the individual difference among students. So we're saying that different students are motivated by different things. So, you know, we should work with what we have, and also by levels. Some students are motivated by maybe an opportunity of getting some work once they are done with their schooling. Some are motivated by building their self-efficacy. And these are diverse capacity of students. So what we are saying is that as a teacher, you should learn your student and then work with what you have. So learning is not placed, it's not written on a stone. It's not an activity that is probably pasted on a stone and cannot be rubbed. Students are very different, they are very diverse, and as a teacher you should know what is the attribution, what do people attribute this education with, and then you can probably work with that.
And I'm also thinking of, earlier we talked about the cultural aspects that are related to the attribution theory, and now maybe we can talk about how to prevent stereotyping, especially now that in an education system whereby we have, like in Kenya, where there is we are multicultural, there is a lot of maybe stereotyping. How do you prevent such?
And I don't know, I've had a lot of that in a lot of that maybe in our society, where somebody succeeds and then they are asked, how did you manage? Wanasema? Ni maombi tu. We don't really want to dispel the issue of God and probably prayers. But when you talk about luck sometimes and propagate the paradigm so much, or the right kind of talk, then it kills the issue of work. Luck is good, but mostly people work are the ones who are lucky. That is, you know, luck is a product of work in most cases, but people don't want to show the work. So, what happens sometimes is also that we work sometimes, but we cannot document our work. So when I'm asked how I managed to get what I get, since I don't have a story of how I managed, I just talk about luck. So that stereotype sometimes can really kill the student or the learners, because they don't get a procedure, they don't get a step, they don't get probably a line of how they should do it, of how they should engage themselves to be successful. And that means that they cannot replicate, so that if I worked hard, then you see, if you're depending on luck, then what we're saying is that you should not work. If I succeed by luck, then why should I work? Why should I work?
And that is how our society is nowadays, but we still believe that someone can be successful out of work. And so maybe we should also talk a little bit about this teacher-student relationship, because that is a very vital element in that we attribute so many things towards the relationship that exists between the teacher and the student.
So what you're saying is that the teachers can benefit from understanding how the students attribute their experience in the classroom. And this is what we call by being empathetic to the students. You take the student's position. As I've said earlier, not all students view education with the same eyes. There are students who view education as a way of impressing their parents. There are those who view it as a way of passing time. There are those who view it as a way of probably having what we call the personal achievement, the source of self-esteem. And when a teacher is able to know some of these things, what they attribute the education to, then they can work in line with that particular line of thought of the student. So by being empathetic is taking their place, talking to them, getting close to them, seeking to understand them and getting close to them. And that will help you, because you see, for you to help me, first of all, it's good for you to know what I need. Otherwise, you'll give me a medicine which works for you, and somebody put it very well. That if you go to a doctor, who probably was sick the other day, and he took a certain drug, and then he looks at you and tell you, just take this drug. I also took it the other day and it really helped me. You see? At the end of the day, he has not diagnosed you. The first thing is to know what's your problem, because you are individuals, you have different issues. Sometimes you may have the same symptoms, but it's not the same disease. So knowing the students can help you to probably do that, and also to probably move in the right direction.
And also talk about the strategies that can be adopted so that to make learning as smooth as it should be.
Thank you for that. So as I've said, the strategies, first of all, is to try to accommodate the different attribution of students. For example, knowing what they value and then working for that. We also talk about goal setting and achievement. You can help the students on how to set their goals by using attribution theory. And by this I'm saying, when they are setting their goals, they should be able to set achievable goals. By achievable goals, you know, goals are just probably statements that try to help us to reach a particular area, or maybe they're destinations that we want to reach. But you see, for you to reach there, you have to have what we call steps. So you break the journey towards your goal into steps, and this is by planning. Otherwise, if you just say, I want to get from this point A to B, sometimes point B is very far. So the best thing is to do what? To break the journey, and by breaking the journey, that also assures your capacity to succeed. Because you now break a very big component into a small subsections. And that helps the student.
And what about, now we've talked about the teacher and the student, but we haven't talked about the parent. Do you think there should be, what kind of relationship should exist between a parent and a teacher?
So that's good. You know, the teacher is the second parent. The teacher is the second parent to the student. That's very important to note. And the current dispensation is such that the teacher spends a lot of time with the parent. And the truth of the matter is that as much as the teacher is the second parent, the two must work together for the student to succeed. If the teacher does not work with the parent, then there's no success. So the attribution can be brought in this way. The teacher has learned what the student wants. The teacher has learned how the student attribute their successes and also their failures, and also their life in general. So if they can communicate this information to the parent, then the parent can also find a basis of supporting the student. And at the end of the day, we now have two arms which are now working in tandem, because you can have a parent who is holding a certain kind of theory on student success, a teacher holding a different and then the student is there. So it's like what they say in Africa, that when two bulls fight, it is the grass that gets hurt. So this student is confused. At home, he's being told something else. In school, he's being told something else. And at the end of the day, they cannot be able to really progress in the way that is required. So I think that is something that probably can be shared amongst those two parties.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is a very important point, because when the parent is giving has a different belief, has their own belief, and then the teacher has their own belief that they are trying to impose on this student, then that is where most of the students actually go, decide to even hate education, because if the parent is supporting the theory of the teacher, or the teacher is supporting the theory of the parent, then I think the student will have 1 week to work through it all. And I think we've had a very informative conversation. The attribution theory, I have had a lot, especially the the blaming game. I've understood that mostly when you're blaming yourself or blaming others, pin it on the attribution theory. Yes, and it is important always to note that, but I haven't understood one thing. We always tend to blame others than blaming ourselves. I don't know why it works like that.
I think the human person likes the easier route. It's like water. You know, water will take the easiest route.
The same way that you've said, luck, between luck and work. Mostly we love luck. If you get the option of luck, then
we don't like working. You choose that one very fast. That is the essence of life.
But I think even without getting that option, we believe that luck will fall on us at some point.
And you know, you talked about blame. That's a very good thing. You know, this blame, as much as you put it into two, blaming of others and blaming of ourselves, you also should consider the nature of blame. Because when you blame yourself, then the blame on yourself, if it is pegged on a factor that you can change, then that is better. But when it is pegged on a factor that you cannot change, then you've buried yourself.
You're finished.
So blame yourself, that's very good. But ensure that the blame is pegged on a factor that you can change.
Exactly. Blame yourself, make sure that your blame is based on a factor that you can change. That is our parting shot for today. Thank you so much for listening to us. You've been with me, Donald Neko, and
Adero Wilson.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.